Welcome to Where the Ramp Ends. I am Summer Parrish. I'm here today with my co host,
Bryce.
and we have special guest Michelle Tetschner today from Florida. She is a mom, an author, and a fellow partners grad. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks so much.
For our listeners today, just describe yourself a little bit, aside from being the mom of a child with Down syndrome.
Well, first of all, thank you both for having me today.
Absolutely.
How would I describe Oh, thank you. How would I describe myself? I think it would be a passionate inclusionista. From the time Raymond was little, we always saw the importance of him being a part of our family, a part of the community, having value, having worth, and finding his place of belonging. So that was always our focus.
And, you're an author also.
Correct. Our book, Fully Included Stories to Inspire Inclusion, is 3 years old. I also have over 25 stories published on The Mighty. It used to be super popular and then it got bought out. But I like to write on disability and I like to share my son Raymond's stories as much as I can to help those parents behind me. Because that's what I was always looking for was inspiration, mentors, a role model. I think that that's super important.
Oh, that's
Mm,
awesome.
and you certainly do that because I'm one of those parents that are behind you, and I do look at your, stories for inspiration as the mother of a little girl, that's younger than Raymond. The way that you support Raymond's independence is actually very inspiring. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about your journey with his independence?
Sure. Happy birthday to Julia in a few weeks, right before we forget. She
Thank
is
you.
so stinking cute. Yeah. Raymond our story for, include for being a passionate advocate started young. We were in kindergarten and we were in pre-K, and that went great. Unknowingly, they suggested that I go into a co-teaching model at a different school where I knew nobody, knew no educators, nothing. But I went in, I said yes, I compromised, and I went in and I shadowed the first day of school, and I was not happy with what was happening. The second day, I was even more unhappy, and the third morning, I pulled him out and said, "We're not doing this." And I didn't give them a choice. I just took him home and said, "We will figure something else out." Unknowingly, I got crosswise with the public school who was like, "You can't just pull your child and not tell us what you're gonna do with him." And so it was an interesting start to my start to advocacy. I knew what Raymond was capable of, and he was not getting anywhere near the supports, of what he needed. He was in this classroom that was supposed to be co-taught, but conveniently, the teacher had said, "It's too much and it's overwhelming, and we're not going to co-teach this year." So right off the bat, they were not satisfying what the IEP said and what my expectations were. So it was a lot.
So, what did you end up doing for school then?
We ended up going back to our school where we had our pre-K, which is our home school. And so I sat down with the principal and had a honest and transparent conversation with her about how he needed to be in that general education classroom. That was our main goal. He needs to be around typical peers. He needs to be around their language. He needs to be around their social behaviors, their norms, their rich language, and following them, and then the flip side of that coin is that those kids are now going to grow up next to Raymond, now have a comfortability with someone with a disability. They're going to know how to greet them, how to act around them, go on to work next to them in school, be on their sports teams. And then guess what? Those guys are the ones who are going to hire Raymond when he's a young adult. Guess what? They're the ones who are going to live next to Raymond when he's a young adult. And they're going to welcome him into their church community, their
Yeah.
social communities and
Yes.
everything. So there's a way bigger picture, right?
Yes, exactly. I was just thinking about this the other day. I feel like a lot of the pushback that we get from now is because we have generation of adults that didn't have that exposure to people
Correct.
with disabilities. And how can we expect people to work alongside, live alongside, just like you were saying, people with disabilities if they weren't educated alongside people with disabilities?
Right. And I think, Summer and I have talked about this, in partners in policy making and in our own personal lives, that kids are very adaptable. It's the parents that need to be taught that these kids and these young people with disabilities and special healthcare needs are just as valuable to the community as able-bodied individuals, and I think that's the biggest reason why Summer and I decided to collaborate and wanna do this children's book series also, is we want to teach parents that, "Hey, you can have friends that have, you know special healthcare needs or, you know, different health challenges and still treat them just like your typical friends." Their lives may look just a little bit different, and I think, um, we really need to sit down with millions of parents and have that hard conversation of, like, d what are we what are we missing here to connect and bridge the gap?
I totally
Precise.
agree. I think I always say I don't have normal friends. They have anxiety, they have body issues, they have, all of this mental stuff. They have a broken arm, they have, whatever. Who's normal? What standard are we holding these kids to? And quit putting them under a microscope. Oh my gosh, I can't. I love telling this story. So one day I get this phone call and it's the second grade teacher and she is so offended and she's like, "Raymond used the word shit today." And I'm like, at first, I was, like, stunned because he's never used that before. So that means he's getting it from school. But my second question that I didn't ask was, did he use it appropriately? Like, like, he's modeling the peers. That's what we want. But you
Yes.
can't say we wanna model the peers, but, so had to walk her off the cliff and remind her that, how many other kids have said that? Well, you're right, lots of them.
Yes.
Uh,
So so what did independence mean to you when Raymond was younger, and how has that definition changed over time for you?
We always had a really good mentor. We were mostly in Mesa, Arizona. We were there for 25 years, and we watched this young man who was about 5 years older than Raymond, and we watched their family, and we watched the things that he did in high school, and we knew that high school he could be included in high school because they were doing it. We knew that he could hold a job because he did it, and
right,
so I think having that mentor and that role model is super important
sure.
as a parent of a young child. Um, for I forgot what the question was. Sorry.
Well, it's just like, what does independence look like? So you were getting a clear view of what independence kinda looked like from somebody else that was being modeled for Raymond and for you, and that's so helpful. Did that seeing that modeled by someone older than Raymond, did that help you kind of change your expectations of Raymond then? Or did that give you hope in what you were expecting from him?
Absolutely. Raymond is the youngest of three boys. My husband and I have three boys. Raymond rocks an extra chromosome, just like your Julia. But he's also perfect. Because he has that extra chromosome. Somebody might have blue eyes, somebody might have brown eyes, blonde hair. He is perfectly created in his own vision. And so when you
Yes.
recognize that and say, of course he's going to make mistakes. Of course he deserves this challenge. He deserves this dignity of risk to make a
Yeah.
mistake and move on. That's a huge mountain to get over for a lot of people.
I
So,
love that. I love that.
We were just talking in our podcast with, our friend Misky about dignity of risk and how challenging that can be for parents, even with typical children, let alone when you know, when your child has a disability, the struggle, um, that comes with that. And
Right.
so and Bryce was even talking about his own mom she attended Partners with us, and she kind of voiced that that was a big struggle for her too, so I think it's just something parents
Yeah,
struggle
because
with.
and I'll add to that, because even as independent as I am living with cerebral palsy, my there's still parts of my mom that's like, "Oh, how is he gonna manage that?" I'm like, "Mom, I'll be 29 next week. I'm good, you know, I'll I'll make it." And I think that that's the thing that a lot of people, it's not that they don't believe that your child's gonna do it, it's, society's already hard enough, and if you add the layers of having special health care needs or a disability or whatever word you wanna use, you know, society's not easy on typical people, society's gonna chew you up and spit you out, that's the lesson that my mom and dad always taught me growing up was, you're gonna have to be bigger and badder than the next person, you know? If if your peers are making a B, you're gonna have to make an A. Not that they were forcing me to, but they knew that society was gonna be tougher on me, so they, in hindsight, had higher expectations for me because they knew that I was gonna have to fight harder to prove myself.
well, yeah, that's very that's awesome that your mom taught you that. I think
Yes,
that that's definitely a life lesson and life skills to know that it's going to happen and to anticipate it. I want to stick to dignity of risk, and I think that when I say that, I get a lot of pushback. I do. I have parents. I feel like in our world, Summer, maybe it's the Down syndrome world specifically. There's two paths you can take. You can say that my child is going to live with me forever, or my child is independent. I want them to be independent enough to live by themselves. And there doesn't seem to be much gray area.
right,
And we have always been a path of Raymond should be able to live as a young adult without me if that's what he chooses. That is his
right.
dream. I'm not making up this dream of him living by himself. He has. And he's asked me to give him wings and give him supports and get him there. And so that's my job.
Because I'm
Yeah,
not gonna lie, when, Summer told me this story that we were gonna, interview you, and she said we're gonna be talking to a mom that has a child with Down syndrome that lives independently on his own. I, as big of a disability advocate as I am and disability champion I am, I even sat there for a few minutes and I said, "Wow, okay, this is a story that I've not heard of." Like, because usually when people think of the word Down syndrome, they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And to think
Yes.
that you have flipped the other side of the coin, Michelle, and been like, "No, Raymond is perfectly fine to live on his own and champion his own life." Do you know how rare that is? To be on the other side of the coin and be like, "No, I want more for my son, and I'm in his corner when he needs me, but I'm gonna let him live his life."
Yep. And I realize very I I don't live in a cotton candy world. I know that
No,
there's gonna be bumps in the road. I know that this might not last forever, you know? He actually lives on the 3rd floor of a building,
right,
in a little condo. He may not always be able to do 3 sets of stairs. Like, everything has conditions, and as long as you're aware of what can happen, again, going back to that dignity of risk, he deserves the opportunity to fail. He deserves the
Sure,
opportunity to, as a 23-year-old man, if he does, it is not his goal to live with his mom. It's not, it would not have been mine. So how can I possibly inflict that on him if it
sure.
wouldn't have been my own stand?
So I
What
guess my next question for you is what do you what I guess what is the greatest attributes that you see in Raymond that you saw independence was possible? What attributes of his really shine to make you realize independence is possible for him?
I mean, I think we started off as a young age making sure that he knew 911 if he needed help. You know, he knew, we gave him a cell phone that, when he was young, probably 12, um, that only had our 4 numbers in it, my 2 boys, myself, and my husband, and then we would add on to that, like, there's a caretaker that, um, he would call occasionally, and she would be like, "Did you know he called me at 10 o'clock last night?" Like, we broadened his circle slowly
Sure.
into people that we trust. um, he needs to practice. So while it is definitely my philosophy that honestly typical children should not have a cell phone until they're as old as possible, we needed Raymond to practice, and so we're on a group text. Sure, he said he will send farting videos and he will send burping videos because he's a boy, that's never
Right.
going to stop, that is never gonna go away, and does he send them to, people that don't find them appropriate? Yeah, he does, and then as all I can say is, "Sorry, that's Raymond," and if you wanna take him off your thing, we'll be happy to, you can be off the list if that's what you choose to, but he's gotta practice, that is every
Right,
day. We all have
right.
that inappropriate friend, let's be honest,
Yeah,
who sends us too many memes about drinking or about whatever, He's so many times I say he is not any different. He is way more alike than different,
mhm.
in so many ways.
So, what has surprised you most about Raymond since he started living more independently?
I think the most heartwarming thing is that, there's a couple stories I could share. So, Raymond lives somewhat close to the beach. He's very spoiled.
Yeah,
We have this great little place for him, in a very safe neighborhood, but it's walkable. It's 5 blocks to the restaurant where he goes for lunch most days. We started off when he was young and we made sure he did chores, right? He started doing his own cooking for breakfast. Every morning he cooks 2 eggs and bacon. Um, he didn't like the way I cooked eggs, and so he's like, "I want him over hard," and I said, "I don't know how to do that," so he said, "Let me," and so I let him, and the kitchen is a mess when he does it, but am I going to stop him from cooking because he makes a mess, or am I gonna let him do what he needs to do and support him through that and teach him how to clean up, teach him how to
right,
load the dishwasher? He does not do dishes by hand, he only does heated dishwasher safe dishes, right? So that's again a support and an accommodation that we've made. Um, he will walk to so his regular day on Wednesday and Thursday, he cooks breakfast. We have a caregiver come in that drives him to work. And then after work, he takes an Uber home and goes straight to the restaurant where he eats his late lunch and then goes back to his condo, cooks taco salad, and then a couple days a week, he works out with a friend. So, um, living by himself has created these paths of other people that I didn't anticipate, but it's changed their lives as much as it's changed Raymond. We on my phone, I have a fire alarm, so I know if he burns the bacon because the fire alarm gets set off. His neighbor next door met Raymond and his roommate who is on the spectrum. Um, met them on occasion, but when the fire alarm went off for the first time, he came running over. I could see it on the Ring camera. We have a ring outside of his door, and he came running over with the fire extinguisher. And it wasn't that big of a deal, but he was willing to step in where they needed. And how many other people are willing to do that, but we haven't given them the opportunity to do so,
right,
right?
Yes.
right. So amazing that he has created this community on his own.
Definitely with my help, but
Right.
once I put things in place, he runs with it.
And, like, it's just kind of comparing, independence versus interdependence and how, interdependence really builds community. Nobody's completely independent. We
Yes.
Yes.
all
Agree.
need supports and accommodations. And so why we expect people with a disability to, live completely independent without supports and accommodations, it's ridiculous. We all need that interdependence. We all need that community. We all need that neighbor that's willing to run over a with a um
Fire
Fire
extinguisher.
extinguisher.
fire extinguisher. Thank you so much. So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah, and one day Raymond, went to this restaurant that he always goes to. He loves to get a it's Larry's Subs. He always gets a salad. That's one of the accommodations that we make is every day for lunch, he has a salad of some kind. Because having the Down syndrome thing, we're always fighting the weight challenges. So we've made accommodations in his day to what he eats, and he sticks to the schedule, for the most part. So he went and I, as his mother, did not put enough money on his debit card. It was at the beginning of the month and I had shifted funds. And so he calls me and he says, Mom, there's no money on the card. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this could be a total meltdown. This could be really bad that he could get really mad that they won't give him his food like they do every day. And then I realize, I go, how are you doing? And he goes, fine. And I go, are you eating right now? And he goes, yeah. And so I go, "They gave you your salad but you didn't pay?" And he goes, "Yeah." Like, of course they did. Like, he thinks that people are going to take care of him, but he's also willing to take in care of help others when given the opportunity, right? So long story short, I contacted the restaurant. I loaded his card, and so he paid before he left, but I brought the employees donuts and said, "Thank you for making sure that this went smoothly." And she said, please, there were 2 people behind him that said that they would pay for his meal, and we just said, "Raymond will take care of it, just give him a chance." So, again,
I love
community is
that.
so huge when we allow it
Right.
to happen, yeah.
I love that. What fears do you still carry as Raymond becomes more independent?
I mean, as much as I love to say that Raymond is independent, interdependent, those fears will never go away. I mean, we all know that there's ugliness in the world. We all know that
Mhm.
people are not always kind. That's like, like you said, Bryce, that's a part of life. It is always a worry. And I think a lot of times I've taken it more personally than Raymond has. He really doesn't, he just shrugs his shoulders. He doesn't really care. He doesn't carry it like we do? He
Right.
doesn't he just doesn't. And I think that's part of the joy of having Down syndrome is that he sees the beauty in people. Wants to laugh, wants to be joyful. That is his goal is to make somebody smile, dance with them, make them laugh. Like that's all he's looking for. And then here we are judging him for that. It's just kind of a
Right.
backwards world sometimes.
Exactly.
What do
Well,
you hope what do you hope that the world learns from Raymond's story of independence and you giving him the opportunity to experience dignity of risk and all the things that you have done to make his life very what people would say normal.
I think that going back to dignity of risk, we started out as young he was probably 12, and I wish that we had started a lot sooner. There and that again, that's in a very like a framed box of dignity of risk being in a safe manner. For example, one time we do it a lot when we're on vacation, I feel like, because we're out of our normal, balance, we're out of our normal place. So we drove around this convenience store like 2 times and then we're like, Raymond, who is very motivated for food, we're like, why don't you, we went in with him and we're like, here's the Hershey bars, here's the M&Ms. Here's $5, buy what you want, and then we parked out front. But it was also a store where we could see in, and he was young, like I said, he was probably 10 or 12, and we were like, then when you're done, come out. And so, like, 4 minutes goes by, and we're like, we know he's at the counter, but we can't see what the interaction is, but he's just chatting with this guy back and forth. So then the guy comes to the door and he, escorts Raymond out, and he comes out and gives me back the $5 and says, "I'm not letting this kid pay for M&Ms." It's like, you just defeated the whole purpose of me giving you independence. So there's like beautiful stories like that, but again, it was in a safe place, very controlled circumstances, and it would have been fine if somebody would have thrown up their hands and we would have gone in and saved the day. But again, we needed him to try. We need him to practice. We need to let
Right.
those reins out just a little bit so that he can.
Love that.
Let's talk about the, Oreo incident a little bit because that gives a good example of the opposite, I believe, dignity of risk. A lot of people, saw your story about Raymond being suspended from, the college program just for asking for an Oreo. Do you wanna Can you walk us through what really happened with that?
Yeah, yes. And I will preface the story by saying that the program now has different directors, different staff. The people that were in place were not the right people. They didn't have the right mindset. But that day, I got a phone call at like 1 in the afternoon, and she calls and she says, "You need to come pick up Raymond. He was suspended because he was soliciting for Oreos." And I started laughing. I soliciting, the only thing I could think of was soliciting for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Like, that was just what popped into my head, and I burst out laughing, and that did not make her happy at all. And I could not backtrack, and so I went and picked him up, and, so sh and she was that was not gonna go away, so she wrote him up for it, and he was asking who he considered a friend for one of their Oreos when they had bought some, and he did not have enough money, and that was something that we had planned for. He does not carry a lot of money on his credit card at all times, um, but that was offensive to her. She did not think that he should be asking somebody for a cookie. And yet, as a college student, we all did. We shared each other's clothes. We bought each other, drinks, beers, food. We shared pizza. Like, that is what college is about. And so
Yes.
for her to take something that was so easy to correct, she easily could have said that, "Raymond, that is not something that you should do," right? If I don't think she was right, but she could have said that and
Yeah.
and talked about why, talked about safety, talked about, but and instead she turned the opportunity into a way to punish, and to take away his independence. So it was very upsetting to our family for sure. And it created a lack of trust in us that they no longer had his back and that he was in a safe place, which is what the college program was supposed to be, right? And so we had to end up pulling him out for our own mental health and safety.
That's so
So,
strange because I myself, who graduated from college and had the college experience, like, that's the whole fun part about being young and being around your peers is, like you
right.
said, you share a meal or you share pizza or you go to the local watering hole and have a beer. That's all about growing up and enjoying life. So, if you're gonna get suspended over an Oreo, I hate to say this, but how stupid is that? Like
Agree, 100% agree.
like,
Wish you would have been in the room.
I mean, if that's the case, we would all been suspended for an Oreo cookie because I I happen to really love Oreos myself, so I guess they can just take my degree
Yeah,
now, I guess. I don't really know.
yeah.
That's absurd to me.
Unfortunately, I couldn't think of another example. I still really can't. And I told her at the time, we all know that guy. the guy that's at the bar and he says, goes to one table and says, "Will you buy me a beer?" Goes to the next table and says, "Will you buy me a beer?" I'm sorry, that is Raymond, and I can say I'm sorry, but that's also real life,
Yeah.
and she did not find that analogy funny. And so that's all you have to have a sense of humor, my gosh, you know?
Well, what do you think that that incident reveals about systems, how they often misunderstand people with intellectual disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities? What do you think that reveals about systems that deal with?
Yeah, this system was set up as a negative, instead of a reward system, it was a punishment. I'm trying to think of what word would be better than that, but, that was how they based it, is you have to fall into this box, you need to do this, and we thought we were bringing him to a program where he could have some that's it was like you said, Bryce, this is college, we're all gonna make mistakes, we all did stuff
Yes.
we probably shouldn't have, we all he was there to have fun, so when a magnifying glass is shown on him, he's never going to survive that, and
No,
so
no.
few people would.
Nobody would. Yeah. So do you think it's more about control in some situations?
That's a great word, Summer, yes.
And what do you think is the answer to these systems creating a remedy for that? Because I think the
I
systems
think
need to address
yeah,
it. I don't think um it wasn't Raymond's problem. Raymond was, got the brunt of somebody else's
Right.
misplaced action. So I think the systems need to
agree.
address this. I mean, do you have any thoughts on a remedy for this need of control?
There are too for and I'm gonna speak to the Down syndrome world. There's Clemson and Syracuse are the top 2, in my eyes, college programs for kids with Down syndrome. They're very inclusive. They have a typical roommate. They they are, they're just like a ingrained part of campus, and that was not the case in this program, and and that was part of the reason I dug it back up again is because there are other kids with Down syndrome who have failed in various programs. Um, it's it's heartbreaking when a program says we are a program for kids with special needs, and yet they accept a child with Down syndrome, a student with Down syndrome, and they're not willing to make those compromises, those accommodations, those special resources needed. Um, in many cases, in our story, it started off with Raymond being late, and instead of working with him directly, there's 1,000 solutions. He could have had a later class, right? He's auditing, we could have had a later class. We could have sent him with a buddy, and that goes back to high school and why it was so important for Raymond to be included is, he did not have an aide in high school because it wasn't needed. We set his program up to have peer mentors. And so he's very motivated by the kid next to him. He is not motivated by the teacher at the front of the room,
Nope.
you know? So that's huge.
Yeah.
What
Um,
were you gonna say, Bryce?
I was saying the same thing, like, you're not gonna be motivated by a teacher in front of the class, like, you're gonna be motivated by the person sitting next to you, sitting in the suck with you and, you know, surviving life, like, you want to have a normal, independent life, you're gonna model it after the person sitting next to you. The teacher isn't living the same life you're wanting to live, they've already done it. He wants to
Exactly.
be
Very well said.
treated just like everybody else, you know? That's not the teacher's responsibility to teach him independence, it's, himself and, the people around him. He's gonna follow what Raymond sees, So if Raymond sees other typical kids getting to class on time, 9 times out of 10, Raymond's probably gonna get on to class on time because he wants to do the cool
Right.
thing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, one of the most heartwarming things I remember from Raymond's high school days was I happened to be visiting one day and came in the front doors, and all of us and Raymond was with me. We were dropping him off late from an appointment. And a whole and, in high school, kids travel in packs, right? So, like 10 of the football guys happened to be coming down the hall together. When they saw Raymond, and they were like, "Raymond, Raymond, Raymond," and it was just like Raymond's like, just putting his arm up, and he's like, "Yeah," and so they, like, crowd around him. Like, he literally had just walked in the school, but he changed those boys' life, and
Yes.
they changed his. So, again, when we're all community and we're all feel like we belong, we all feel like we're safe, that's what changes the world?
You know,
Yes.
that kinda gets me in mind of we had a fellow, partners in policymaking graduate that really changed my life in summer and I's class. Jeremy and his mom were in partners with us, and she talked about how, in their community, several of the students in Jeremy's class actually got into the special needs healthcare force because of Jeremy and being around Jeremy and the community. And it it's amazing to me as an adult now. I've ran into several of my classmates from high school, and they've come up to me and said, "Now that I have children of my own, now I understand those lessons that you were trying to teach me growing up, that you just wanted to be like everybody else."
Yeah, I believe Jeremy's mom said more than 20 of his classmates went into a field in the disability healthcare, one or education. One of those 2. So,
Yeah,
absolutely
I totally
incredible.
believe that.
Absolutely incredible. So, like, when when our kids aren't in the mainstream classroom, it's not just hurting our kids, it's hurting
No.
those typical kids who are missing out on, could be missing out on their calling.
Yes.
Agree. That's a great way to say it. Yes. Yep.
What strengths does Raymond have that people often overlook?
I think it's important for me to say also that Raymond is not super verbal. He is not there's a lot of kids with Down syndrome who are like the mayor of the town, and they chat everyone up, and they're very social. Raymond is not. So the other thing that we practiced when he was little was, he had a communication device, and we would, load in. I knew he was going to Wendy's, so we would, load in a picture of whatever he wanted, or I would text him. When he first started buying coffee, he was going to this little coffee shop, and sometimes he wanted caramel and sometimes he wanted chocolate. And so I would use, oh gosh, I'm trying to think. It was an app that you took a picture and made it bigger font, right? That's what we were looking for, was big font. And then, it said caramel macchiato, blah, blah, blah. And so he would show them the picture and he wouldn't have to talk. For Raymond, language is something he holds very tight to him. He will not, he senses people's energy a lot. And if you come up to him in a bad mood and be like, I need blah, blah, he's going to not say a word to you or walk away, which is perceived as being rude. But by the same token, he knows enough that he's not going to win with that person, right? There's
Right.
no winning with that, and he knows that. So he just usually chooses not to engage. Um, but and again, it's about those accommodations. What does he need to feel comfortable enough to walk up to that window and do it? Again, those choices like the M&Ms versus the Hershey bar, that's going to be motivating to him. He has a choice in the matter.
Yes.
He gets something that he picks, and it's food. So that's like really key to digging down deeper to finding what his currency is, finding what's gonna motivate him, and making it meaningful and relevant.
Eh,
We had a at one of our schools, and instead of having an aide all the time because they got sick of each other, She got as sick of Raymond as Raymond did of her. In the afternoons, he would shift with a different person and they would go and do some speech stuff and some reading stuff. And they did, I can't even tell you, she's like, I can't even tell you the amount of basketballs that I have shot with him in the past few months. They would be like, they would do, you read this card and you got it right, shoot a basket, you know? Read this sentence, shoot a basket. So she turned this project and this homework into something that was meaningful and relevant to him. And that is the key in life, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Going to the gym is not fun. It's hard work. But if we're going with a friend, it's fun. Or if we see results, it's fun. But we've got to make it something that's going to matter to us, or we're not going to do it as humans.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up because I love going to the gym. I did Ironmans for 6 years. I'm a
Yeah.
two-time
Yeah.
Ironman finisher and competed in the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii in 2022. You know, I loved, uh going to the gym, still do, and that's one of those things that I fell in love with after going with a friend. I realized how much I enjoyed lifting weights and doing the machines and, it's no diff and what was really cool was the more I went and the more people started to see me going in there, they were like, "Oh, man, Rice is re" I started motivating other people. They're like, I see you every week and I'm complaining and bitching about coming and I see you and I'm like, I can't complain anymore.
Absolutely. That's a great example. Yes. Yeah.
And it's not like I want people to learn something from me, but it's like if I'm coming every week because I want to be here, like what's your excuse?
We all need that motivation from somebody and, a little bit of hope in what we're
Right.
a mixture of hope and motivation at the same time. Michelle, what mistakes did you make along the way that you're actually now grateful for?
Oh, that's a good one. I do want to say, I had a friend say to me this past weekend. She said her daughter, her daughter is 19, and she said we're already counting days until she's 21. She's like, I know you drank with Raymond on his 21st birthday. And I said, we did. And I will add also that I got a lot of not nice comments because of that. That is, again, one of those things that kids with Down syndrome should not drink. And while I'm not saying I don't disagree with that statement, what I am saying is I am not going to deny Raymond something that we all look forward to on our 21st
Yes.
birthday.
Yes.
Because he has an extra chromosome, he does not need to miss that. And so I was not going to deny him that. And
Good
so
for
this friend
you.
said, she said, I don't know what I should give her to drink. And she goes, I know she would like blah, blah. I go, oh, I go, but again, dignity of risk. Yes, do
Right.
have the drink. But if you go back and look, you know what Raymond had? A nasty beer. Nobody likes beer. So you don't give them the fruity drinks. You don't give them something that they're going to like. You give them the beer, which is safer than, hard alcohol, which is, not as like addictive. That's not the right word, but not so sugary, not so yummy. You're going to give them something that's more plain that they can, So again,
Yes.
dignity of risk within that
With
box of,
Yes.
well, I'm probably not going to drink a beer every time I go out because it didn't
Mm,
taste that great the first time,
no.
you know?
absolutely, and I love that point because, yes, we need to point out that giving giving our kids, even adult kids, the chance to make their own decisions doesn't mean taking away the safety nets.
Right, exactly. And I
Yes.
think that
Yes. Well said.
that's a very valid point to say, you know, every 21-year-old when they turn 21, that's like the highlight of turning 21. Just because somebody has a disability does not mean that they get that. experience stripped away from them. I think that in itself is just wrong. Like, I mean, you don't have to get him absolutely, rolling on the floor wasted, but let him have a let him have a drink. When Julia turns 21, let her have a glass of champagne and call it good.
I'm making
We are
notes over here.
we are denying we as a society need to quit denying these, you know, children the opportunity to live their lives as normal as possible. It might look different than Becky over here, but it's still a normal life.
I That is one thing that kind of shocked me. I think I was still pregnant with Julia. I was, like, so fascinated by, children with Down syndrome and teens, and I was following all these accounts, and there were some accounts where I would come across, pull it up, and there's, a young woman that has Down syndrome drinking a glass of champagne, and that shocked me. I'm just being transparent, but it's so I I had to go through that thought process, like, "Okay,
Yes.
but she's a young woman. She's not
Yes.
a forever child."
Right.
And
Right.
so she's a young woman that has Down syndrome. She's not a So we have to,
Yes.
take that label off of, and that's hard to do, I think, for society to not see
Right.
adults that have Down syndrome as forever children. I think that's
And
something
that's
that
one of the things
society
that I
does.
That's one of the things that I talked about in Partners is society loves to put all people with disabilities in a box. We are all the same. We have all the same, things. And I think that's part of the reason why I kind of went off in Partners in Policymaking and said, if I wasn't in a wheelchair with all the degrees and certifications that I have, I would already be making over six figures. But since I live with cerebral palsy and am in this chair, people haven't really taken me seriously, and I've been able to have a full-time career yet. So, I've kind of had to figure it out on my own and not let society, you know, defeat me. I've
I
not
agree. I agree, Bryce.
Yeah. Like, if you let society defeat you and have them say, "Well, you're not gonna figure it out," you're letting society defeat you.
Agree. And we just we yeah, it is. It just keeps the stereotypes don't always go away. And I
No.
always say that about the R word. And I instead of a box, I say a bucket. The R word puts every single person in a bucket. And it's a very derogatory bucket. And it does not look at gifts and talents and what we
Yes.
can do. And sometimes and especially as parents, we need to get out of the way. Let them, try certain things and try new things and know that they're going to fail and learn from those lessons. Um, you asked what mistake, and I think it would really be that we waited so long um, to have Raymond try some of these different things. I also think I wasn't always the best advocate for Raymond or anybody because I do take things personally. So when somebody's, being derogatory towards Raymond or anyone else, like at an IEP meeting, I do not, I don't like it. It's just so disrespectful. It's so hurtful.
Yes.
And you're trying to shape somebody into something, the whole idea of an IEP meeting, and thankfully I'm done with them, but I'm glad to help somebody else with them. It's based on a weakness, that's how it starts. Here's what
Right.
the child can't do, here's what they need
Yes.
help with, instead of starting with a talent-based document
Right.
that talks about what their strengths are. Like,
Yes.
Raymond was always great at memorizing things, so we did everything in flashcards. Everything was a flashcard. And he grew from those, and we sequenced the cards, and we did for pre-reading skills, we did, Natalie Hale fast flash method. Those are things that, I hope a lot of young parents know about because those are what created a lot of success for Raymond.
Yeah, I agree on the strengths. Julia, whenever she was first evaluated, she scored a 90, like a 95 on her social skills. And when it was time to go to pre-K, she still wasn't potty trained. And I was really struggling with potty training her at home. I went to the Down syndrome convention, went to a workshop on potty training. Already I had 5 kids before her. And so potty training I wasn't new to this rodeo, but I was really struggling. But when she went to school and she was around her peers who, were going to the bathroom, she was just like, "Oh, this is what I'm supposed to do." So, we've learned to really, try and work when we're working on something, try to really encourage that social interaction with her because that's what she needs in order to learn. I can't imagine, she's in the mainstream classroom 80% of the day, um, or more. I can imagine her being stuck in a sped room all day. She would not learn that way.
Yeah. I agree, and unfortunately, most what parents don't is sometimes it's what the questions that you don't ask, Um, and I think, with the college program, we did not ask if there what resources were available, we didn't ask, um, in certain days or ways, like what can you do to help him if? Because we know there are gonna be we know there's gonna be molehills. We just don't want them to get to be mountains. So we wanna have the
Right.
conversation before we can't get past it. And in school, I would get a phone call and they would say, Raymond's doing blah blah, and I'd be like, okay, can I come in tomorrow and watch? Because I could usually pick out the problem within the first 10 minutes.
Right.
But from their viewpoint, they see it so differently. And I'd be like, "Do you hear that buzzing noise? Do you not hear the kids going to gym right now and they're pounding on the wall?" Like that, those things are normal to them, but they're aggravating to certain students or to, whatever. So,
Yeah. Well, Michelle, what would you say to parents of younger children that have Down syndrome who are struggling to imagine their child having adult independence? I will say that's something that I I told Bryce when he was saying, he's like, "I can't fathom this." And I said, "I can't either." And so share a little bit of advice for that parent that's struggling with that idea.
um, I said to a friend recently, if your child can be at home by themselves for 4 to 6 to 8 hours by themselves, and that's a goal that we work at as parents, We put all of these different things into place in order for that to happen. Why can't they be at an apartment by themselves for that amount of time, right? If they I am also big on visual charts, so Raymond has the visual chart, he knows how to brush his teeth, take the shower. Like, if he can complete this task list by himself at your house, why can't that be shifted over and he can do it independently somewhere else? Like, you have to take these set of skills that are learned and know that they can go to a different place. We also did a lot of camps when Raymond was in his teenage years. He went to Camp Pals. We did a Young Life camp. We did all of these things and knew that he could be away from us for a week. And if he can be away from us for a week, why can't he be in an apartment away from us for 2 days, 3 days? And it's not like we just set up this apartment, by the way. Again, going back to accommodations. He spent the night, would come home a night, spent 2 nights away, came home for a night. We also created right away, we created a reward schedule that this is what, if he did this, then he got to stay overnight. If he did this, then he could go to the restaurant, order by himself. All of this, took probably 2 years, when you back it up,
Right.
So, but again, putting that positive reward system in place so that we all know what the positive outcome is a huge vision and goal to get there.
I
Well,
love that so much.
yeah, I do too. I mean, it's just such clear, precise directions. You could probably write, a book on that, on a book directions for parents on supporting
Adult
independence.
independence.
Yeah, supported independence. It's just amazing the what you've done with Raymond, and I admire you so much. Bryce, do you have any final thoughts or questions for
I
Michelle?
do. What do you want Raymond's legacy to be defined as?
Wow, that's he works at the coffee shop, 2 coffee shops. He has 2 jobs. Um, he doesn't get a lot of hours at either one, but they are, the highlight of his week. And his favorite saying, and somebody just said it this weekend, because, like you, Summer, we know of each other, but we don't know each other. And Jacksonville is a very big city, and, what I will say to him is, "Did somebody come in that knew you today?" And he goes, "Yep, I'm the famous guy." He loves to be known. He just loves to belong. He wants to know that he has worth. Isn't that at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want?
Yeah,
I love
yes.
that. He's a
And
he's a local celebrity.
I'll end with this, similar to what you just said, that's one of the main reasons why I signed on with Summer is because I said I want Julia to have a platform to for the world to see that living with Down syndrome is not a bad thing. They put such a negative connotation on the word disability, and I'm trying to move away from that.
Yeah. It is a part of who Raymond is. It is not who he is.
Absolutely. And we can end with that.
Well, I will give Michelle, like, one last chance to share your final thoughts, before we end the podcast. Do you have any last words that you wanna say?
I think as parents, like you said, it can be uncomfortable, but we have to get out of the way for our kids, We can't, from the time they're little, make statements like they're always gonna live with us, because the reality is, A, as aging parents, they may not always live with you, and B, they may not want to, and it's not fair to think that you're pigeonholing them into this one, living situation. We've got to expand our expectations. We've got to think bigger in our community, and just creating these pockets of welcoming and belonging is huge. And thank you both for having me today. Again, thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, we appreciate you taking the time to be on our podcast, and I think, um, if you ever would like to be on again, we'd love to have you on again because I feel like you have
Yes,
have
absolutely.
more wisdom to share, so you might have to come on again a time or 2.
Would love it. I love talking inclusion. I'm a passionate inclusionista, right?
We always enjoy having a conversation with a fellow partners in policymaking grad also.
Partners in policy making is so needed. I wish, that should be almost like required education for people with a child with a disability. Go through your local partners in policy making. It'll truly change your life. Please.
Yes, as many people as possible, and that's one reason that we wanted to create the podcast is for people that, have been unable to go through partners in policymaking, they can get a little bit of a taste of it here also. But we will end on that thought today. Go check out your local partners in policymaking or your state's partner in policymaking class and get some wisdom. And Bryce, I will let you sign us off.
For Where the Ramp Ends, I'm Bryce.
And I'm Summer.
This is Where the Ramp Ends and Where Your Journey Begins. Till next time. Bye bye.